For years, I believed I had the perfect life. Briar and I met in our early 20s, and from the moment I saw her, I knew she was special. She had this way of lighting up a room, her laughter infectious and her kindness genuine. It didn't take long for us to fall in love. We were inseparable, building a relationship on what I thought was a foundation of trust and mutual respect. Marriage came naturally to us. I remember our wedding day vividly, the way Briar looked as she walked down the aisle, the promises we made to each other, and the overwhelming feeling that I was the luckiest man alive. Life was full of promise, and I was ready to give everything to make her happy. Our journey together felt like something out of a fairy tale. We bought a cozy home in a quiet neighborhood and spent countless weekends decorating it, turning it into a place where we could start our family. When Briar told me she was pregnant with Lucas, I felt a kind of joy I can't even put into words. Becoming a father was something I'd always dreamed of, and seeing Briar glow during her pregnancy only made me love her more. The day Lucas was born, I remember holding him in my arms and feeling an overwhelming sense of pride. He was so small, so fragile, and yet so perfect. Briar looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "He's got your eyes." That moment cemented my belief that we were a family, bonded not just by love but by something deeper. 2 years later, Mia came into our lives. Another beautiful addition to our family, another miracle I was blessed to experience. Our days were filled with laughter, milestones, and memories that I thought would last forever. From Lucas's first steps to Mia's first words, I was there for everything. I worked hard to provide for them, often putting in long hours, but I didn't mind. I saw it as my responsibility to give them the life they deserved. Briar was an incredible mother. She had this natural way with the kids, always knowing how to calm them when they cried or make them laugh when they were upset. Watching her with them filled my heart with gratitude. I loved her even more for the way she loved our children. To me, we were the definition of a happy family. But now, looking back, there were moments, tiny cracks in the perfect picture that I chose to ignore. Friends and family would occasionally comment on how Lucas and Mia didn't look much like me. "They've got Briar's genes," I'd say with a laugh, brushing off the remarks. It never bothered me at the time, because I trusted Briar completely. She was my wife, the mother of my children, and the person I had built my life around. Why would I ever question her? Still, there were subtle moments that seemed insignificant then but now haunt me. I remember a time when one of Briar's friends joked that Lucas had the same cheeky grin as a guy she used to know. Briar laughed it off, saying something like, "Oh, stop it, don't embarrass me." I didn't think much of it then, chalking it up to harmless banter. But now I can't help but replay that moment in my mind, wondering if there was more to her reaction than I realized. Our intimacy was another thing I never questioned. We had our ups and downs, as any couple does, but I always believed our connection was strong. Briar was affectionate, caring, and attentive. I never felt like I had to compete for her love. She made me feel like I was enough, like I was her everything. That belief kept me blind to the signs that something might have been wrong. Even the way Briar avoided talking about her past relationships didn't raise any red flags for me. When we were dating, she'd occasionally mention an old flame or two, but she'd quickly change the subject. I assumed she just didn't want to dwell on the past, and I respected that. After all, I wasn't interested in digging into old wounds. Now, as I reflect on those years, I realize how much I took for granted. I was so focused on being the best husband and father that I never considered the possibility of betrayal. To me, Briar was my partner in every sense of the word. She was the woman I trusted with my heart, my future, and my family. I couldn't see the cracks forming in the foundation of our relationship because I didn't want to. I believed in her, in us, in the life we had built together. Little did I know that the perfect picture I cherished was nothing more than an illusion, one that would shatter with the arrival of a single envelope. Everything changed during a family gathering one summer evening. It was a casual affair, with cousins, aunts, uncles, and distant relatives mingling over food and laughter. Briar had always loved hosting these kinds of events, and I enjoyed seeing her in her element. She looked radiant that evening, effortlessly moving between conversations and making everyone feel at home. It was the kind of day that reminded me why I fell in love with her. The kids were running around with their cousins, their laughter echoing through the backyard. Lucas was playing tag, his face lighting up every time he managed to outrun someone. Mia was with the younger kids, showing off her latest doll. I watched them with pride, thinking about how lucky I was to have a family like this. At some point during the evening, I found myself in a conversation with one of Briar's distant relatives. He was older, someone I didn't know very well, but he seemed friendly enough. As we chatted, Lucas ran past us, laughing as he dodged one of his cousins. The man chuckled, nodding toward Lucas, and said, he's got the same look as that friend of Briar's. What was his name? Oh yes, Caleb. The comment was casual, almost careless, as if it was nothing more than an observation. I laughed along politely, brushing it off like it didn't matter. But something about the way he said it stuck with me. Caleb. The name sounded familiar, though I couldn't place it. I knew Briar had mentioned a Caleb once or twice in passing years ago, but it didn't seem important at the time. As the evening went on, I tried to shake off the comment. It was probably nothing, a meaningless remark made by someone who didn't know what he was talking about. But the thought lingered, creeping into my mind like an unwelcome guest. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way Lucas's features seemed to differ from mine. The way Mia's smile was identical to Briar's but lacked any trace of me. These were things I had always dismissed before. I loved my kids, they were mine in every way that mattered. But now, with that single comment echoing in my mind, I couldn't help but see them differently. I hated myself for it. What kind of father questions the legitimacy of his own children? What kind of husband doubts the woman he's loved for so many years? The days that followed were filled with unease. I tried to act normal, not wanting Briar to notice anything was wrong. But the more I tried to suppress my thoughts, the more they consumed me. Every time I looked at Lucas and Mia, I found myself searching for similarities, for evidence that they were truly mine. It was a horrible feeling, one that made me feel guilty and ashamed. I started replaying moments in my head, looking for signs I might have missed. Briar's nervous laughter when people commented on how much the kids resembled her but not me. The way she always seemed to deflect conversations about their early years. The occasional late nights she spent out with friends, claiming it was just a girls' night at the time. I had never questioned her. I trusted her completely. But now, those memories felt different, like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was assembling. I didn't want to believe that Briar could have betrayed me. She was my wife, the woman I had built my life with. But the doubts were like a growing storm, impossible to ignore. I found myself obsessing over the details, analyzing every interaction, every memory, every photo of the kids. I even started comparing them to myself in old family pictures, looking for any resemblance that would put my mind at ease. The worst part was that I couldn't talk to anyone about it. How do you bring up something like this? How do you tell your wife you're doubting the paternity of your own children? I didn't want to accuse her of anything without proof, but I also couldn't keep living with the uncertainty. It felt like I was trapped, caught between my love for Briar and the nagging doubts that were slowly eating away at me. Eventually, I decided I couldn't let the questions go unanswered. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. It wasn't just about me, it was about Lucas and Mia. They deserved to have a father who was fully committed to them, who could love them without reservation. And if there was even a chance that something wasn't right, I owed it to them to find out. The decision to take a DNA test was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It felt like a betrayal of my own, a violation of the trust Briar and I had built. But at that point, I didn't see any other way forward. The doubts were too loud to ignore, and the only way to silence them was with the truth. One day I decided I couldn't keep living with the doubts that had taken over my mind. I told myself that I wasn't accusing Briar of anything, I just needed peace of mind. That's how I justified it. The reality, though, was much darker. Deep down, I think I already suspected the truth. Maybe I wasn't ready to admit it to myself yet, but the nagging feeling in my gut was too persistent to ignore. I went online and started researching DNA tests. It was surprisingly easy to order one. A few clicks, and the kit was on its way to my house. I kept it a secret from Briar. I told myself it was because I didn't want to upset her. But the real reason was fear. I was terrified of what her reaction might be. Would she be angry, defensive, or worse, silent? When the kit arrived, I waited until Briar was out running errands to open it. My hands were shaking as I read through the instructions. It all felt so clinical, so cold. Swabbing my own cheek was easy, but when it came to collecting samples from Lucas and Mia, I hesitated. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, that it was just a precaution, but the guilt weighed heavily on me. These were my kids, the ones I had loved and raised since the day they were born. What kind of father questioned something so fundamental? I found an excuse to swab their cheeks without raising suspicion. They thought it was a game, something fun their dad came up with. Watching their innocent faces as they laughed and played, completely unaware of the storm brewing in my mind, almost made me stop. Almost. But I had come this far, and there was no turning back. Once I mailed the samples, the waiting began. Every day felt like an eternity. I went about my routine as best I could, but the doubts were louder than ever. Every time I looked at Briar, I felt a mixture of love and suspicion. She would smile at me, completely unaware of what I had done, and I'd feel a pang of guilt so sharp it almost took my breath away. I kept replaying moments in my head, trying to convince myself that I was wrong. Maybe Lucas and Mia didn't look like me, but genetics could be unpredictable. Maybe the comments from Briar's relatives were just harmless jokes, not based on anything real. I clung to these thoughts, desperate for them to be true. When the email notification came that the results were ready, I froze. I had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. My hands trembled as I clicked the link to view the report. The words blurred together at first, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Then slowly, the reality sank in. Neither Lucas nor Mia were biologically mine, not even close. The room seemed to spin around me as I stared at the results. I reread them over and over, hoping I had made a mistake. But there was no mistake. The science was clear, and the truth was undeniable. My children, the ones I had loved, cared for, and sacrificed so much for, were not mine. The pain hit me like a tidal wave. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the magnitude of it. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a lie that had been woven into the fabric of my entire life. Briar had kept this from me for years, letting me believe I was their father, letting me build my life around them. Around her. I felt like my entire world had been ripped out from under me. Every memory, every moment of joy, every milestone I had celebrated with Lucas and Mia now felt tainted. I wanted to scream, to cry, to break something, anything to release the overwhelming rage and heartbreak consuming me. At the same time, a deep sense of loss settled over me. I wasn't just grieving the betrayal, I was grieving the life I thought I had. The family I thought was mine. The man I thought I was. I sat there for hours, staring at the results. A million questions ran through my mind. Who was their real father? Did Briar know? How could she have done this to me? And what was I supposed to do now? Part of me wanted to confront Briar immediately, to demand answers and make her feel the pain I was feeling. But another part of me hesitated. What if there was more to the story? What if she had a reason, an explanation, something that could make this all make sense? But deep down, I knew there was no explanation that could undo the damage. The trust I had in her and our marriage was shattered, and no matter what she said or did, I would never see her or myself the same way again. Confronting Briar was something I had rehearsed in my head 100 times, but when the moment came, I felt like I was walking into a storm without a plan. I knew there was no easy way to say it, no way to soften the blow of what I had discovered. My emotions were a whirlwind of anger, heartbreak, and betrayal, but beneath it all, there was also a strange kind of fear of what she would say, fear of what I was about to learn, and fear of what it would mean for our family. I waited until the kids were asleep. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Briar was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, looking so calm and unaware. I stood there for a moment, watching her, wondering how I had missed it. How had I not seen the lies, the betrayal? Or had I seen them and chosen to ignore them because it was easier to believe the life we had was real? I sat down across from her, my hands shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. She looked up at me, sensing something was wrong. Before I could lose my nerve, I laid the DNA results on the table between us. The words came out in a rush, a mixture of accusation and desperation. I told her what I had done, what the results showed, and then I asked the question I had been dreading: why? The color drained from her face as she looked at the paper. For a moment, she didn't say anything. The silence stretched on, and my mind raced with every possible explanation. Was she going to deny it? Was she going to lie? Or was she going to tell me something that would make this even worse than it already was? When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. She admitted it, everything. She confessed to having an affair early in our marriage, around the time Lucas was conceived. She said it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, something she deeply regretted. But as the words spilled out, it became clear that this wasn't just a one-time thing. She admitted that she wasn't sure if Lucas or Mia were mine. The weight of her confession hit me like a blow to the chest. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the years of deception, the lies she had told not just to me but to herself. She had built this life with me knowing it was based on a lie. She had watched me love Lucas and Mia, knowing there was a chance they weren't mine. And she had let me believe it because it was easier for her to keep the truth buried. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, to make her feel the pain I was feeling. But all I could do was sit there, numb, as she cried and apologized over and over. Her tears didn't move me. In that moment, I couldn't feel anything but the overwhelming sense of loss. Loss of trust, loss of the woman I thought I knew, and loss of the family I thought we had built together. I asked her who the father was, and her hesitation told me everything I needed to know. She didn't have an answer because she didn't know. She couldn't tell me if it was one man or two or even more. That uncertainty was like a knife twisting in my chest. How could she have been so careless? How could she have risked everything we had for something so fleeting? Briar kept saying she didn't want to hurt me, that she thought it would be better if I didn't know. She said she didn't think it mattered because I was the one who raised Lucas and Mia, the one who had been there for them every step of the way. But her words felt hollow, like she was trying to justify something that could never be justified. I told her I needed time to think, that I couldn't look at her right now. She begged me to stay, to talk it through, but I couldn't. I felt like I was suffocating, like the walls of the house we had built together were closing in on me. I needed to get out, to clear my head, to figure out what to do next. As I drove aimlessly through the night, the reality of the situation began to sink in. My marriage was built on a lie. The woman I had trusted more than anyone had betrayed me in the most profound way possible. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about Lucas and Mia. They were innocent in all of this. They didn't ask for any of this. No matter what the DNA test said, they were still my kids in every way that mattered. But what about Briar? Could I ever forgive her? Could I ever look at her the same way again? The answers didn't come that night. All I knew was that my life would never be the same. The foundation I had built everything on had crumbled, and I was left standing in the rubble, trying to figure out how to move forward. The days following the confrontation felt like a blur. I couldn't look at Briar without feeling a deep, gnawing sense of betrayal. I went through the motions of daily life, but nothing felt real anymore. Every morning I would wake up with the weight of the DNA results pressing on my chest, and every night I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying everything that had happened. I wanted to move past it, to find some semblance of peace, but the questions kept swirling in my mind. Briar tried to reach out to me. She called, texted, and even showed up at my office desperate to talk, to explain. But I couldn't bring myself to face her. The woman I had loved for years, the woman I had built my life around, had shattered everything in an instant. I wasn't sure I could ever see her the same way again, and the thought of sitting down with her, listening to her try to justify what she had done, felt like more than I could handle. The kids seemed oblivious to the tension between us. Lucas and Mia were still their usual selves, playing, laughing, and asking me to join in their games. But even as I smiled and spent time with them, there was a quiet sadness in my heart. They were my children in every sense except the biological one, and that truth, no matter how much I tried to ignore it, was always there, lurking in the background. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Briar sat down across from me in the living room. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was a sense of resolve in her demeanor. She told me she had been thinking about everything about us, about the kids, about the life we had built together, and that she couldn't live in this limbo anymore. She said she wanted to fight for our family, that she was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to hold on to the life I had known, to the family I thought was mine. But the truth was, I couldn't just erase what had happened. The damage was done, and no amount of apologies or promises could undo the hurt I felt. "I don't know if I can do this," I told her, my voice barely above a whisper. The words felt foreign, like they weren't even mine. I had spent years building a future with her, planning for the years ahead, and now I was standing at a crossroads, unsure of which direction to take. Could I really forgive her? Could I ever trust her again? Briar reached for my hand, her touch tentative, as if she wasn't sure how I would respond. "I love you," she said, her voice breaking. "I've always loved you, and I'm so sorry for what I've done, but I want us to try again. Please." Her words were heartfelt, but they didn't make the pain go away. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the guilt weighing heavily on her. But no matter how sorry she was, I couldn't forget the years of lies, the years of feeling like I was living a life built on falsehoods. I wanted to believe her, but the foundation of our relationship had cracked, and I wasn't sure it could be fixed. I spent the next few days in a daze, lost in my thoughts and trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't just keep going through the motions, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I had to make a choice. But what was the right choice? I knew that Lucas and Mia were still my children, no matter what the DNA results said. They were my responsibility, my love, my heart. But what about Briar? Could I ever see her as the woman I once trusted, or would she forever be the one who had betrayed me? Could I forgive her? In the end, I realized that forgiveness wasn't something that could happen overnight. It wasn't something I could force myself into, no matter how much I wanted to move past the hurt. Forgiveness takes time, and for now I needed space to figure out who I was without the woman I thought I would spend my life with. I talked to a therapist about everything: the betrayal, the hurt, the anger. It wasn't easy, and at times it felt like too much to bear. But with time, I began to understand that healing wasn't about erasing the past, it was about learning to live with it, to find a way forward, even if that meant making difficult decisions. Briar and I remained separated for a while. I spent more time with the kids, focusing on their needs, trying to be the father they deserved. But there were still moments when the weight of everything felt unbearable. I missed the family I thought we had been, the life we had built. But I also knew that the person I had been, the man who trusted blindly, who never questioned his own family, was gone. The future was uncertain, and for the first time in my life I had no idea what it would look like. But one thing was clear: I couldn't go back to the way things were. What had been shattered couldn't be pieced back together in the same way. I had to find a new path, one where I could heal, where I could learn to love and trust again, whether that meant rebuilding my family or walking away from it altogether. The journey ahead was mine to navigate, and all I could do was take it one step at a time.